Finally, this family is entering a new era. The moment my daughter-in-law Vanessa raised her wine glass and said those words at my Christmas dinner table, I realized I was no longer being treated like the heart of the family. I was being treated like furniture people were too polite to throw away. The room fell into that strange kind of silence families create when everyone feels uncomfortable, but nobody wants to be the first to admit it. My grandson kept poking at his mashed potatoes. My niece avoided eye contact by pretending to fix her bracelet. Even the Christmas music playing softly through the kitchen speakers suddenly felt too loud. I stood near the dining room archway holding a tray of green bean casserole that had taken me nearly 2 hours to prepare from scratch. My hands were warm from the ceramic dish, but the rest of me felt cold. Not weak, not emotional, just cold in the way windows feel during December storms. Vanessa smiled brightly from the head of the table, like she had been rehearsing that moment for weeks. Maybe she had. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress that probably cost more than my first car back in 1974. Her blonde hair fell in soft curls over her shoulders, perfectly arranged, not a strand out of place. She looked beautiful in the polished, magazine cover way women look when they spend more time curating appearances than building relationships. We're updating some traditions this year, she continued cheerfully while adjusting the gold napkin rings I bought nearly 20 years ago. A fresh start can be healthy for families. Fresh start. Healthy. Such harmless little words. That is the thing about humiliation when it comes from family. It rarely arrives screaming. It arrives wrapped in politeness. I slowly placed the casserole on the counter beside the kitchen entrance and looked toward the Christmas tree standing in the corner of the living room. My chest tightened instantly. The angel ornament Robert gave me during our first Christmas as husband and wife was missing from the top branch. 42 years that ornament had watched over this family. 42 years. Even after Robert passed away from heart failure 8 winters ago, I still carefully wrapped that angel in tissue paper every January and placed it back on the highest shelf in my hallway closet myself. But tonight, it had disappeared. In its place sat a giant glittering gold star Vanessa had apparently chosen because it matched her dining theme. Gold and ivory. Minimalist Christmas, she called it earlier that afternoon while moving half my decorations into storage bins in the garage. It just looks cleaner this way, Eleanor, she had told me with a patient smile people use on difficult elderly patients in expensive nursing homes. Eleanor. Not Mom. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Just Eleanor. As if I were some distant guest invited to dinner instead of the woman who had spent 30 years making every Christmas magical for this family after clawing my way through widowhood, double shifts at the county library, and every lonely December night that followed. My son Daniel sat beside her wearing the same nervous expression he had worn since arriving 3 hours earlier. He barely spoke while Vanessa directed everyone where to sit, what appetizers to eat, even which holiday stories were worth retelling. Twice she interrupted me mid-sentence to clarify details nobody had asked her to clarify. The second time, I noticed my sister Margaret quietly lower her wine glass and stare directly at me with concern. She saw it too. The takeover. The quiet replacement happening right in front of everyone while Christmas lights reflected softly against polished silverware and smiling family photographs. Then Vanessa laughed lightly and placed her hand over Daniel's wrist. Honestly, she said, glancing around the table, I think it's time younger people started taking control of family holidays. Some traditions just become outdated after a while. A few people forced awkward little laughs. My heart did not break in that moment. Hearts breaking is loud and dramatic. This was quieter than that. This felt like watching someone slowly erase my fingerprints from a life I spent decades building. Vanessa leaned back in my husband's old dining chair as though she had been born there. That chair used to belong to Robert. Nobody ever sat in it during Christmas dinner after he passed away. Not because I demanded it. The family simply understood. Some absences deserve respect. But apparently respect had become old-fashioned too. I watched her tap her manicured nails lightly against the stem of her wine glass while she smiled at my nephew's wife across the table. I told Daniel we should host Christmas at our place next year, she said casually. Something smaller, more modern, less cluttered. My eyes drifted slowly around the dining room, less cluttered. Her gaze moved toward the antique cabinet beside the fireplace, where decades of Christmas cards still stood displayed behind glass. Cards from children who had grown up. Cards Robert and I sent during years when money was tight, but love was not. Every single object in that room carried history. But to Vanessa, history was inconvenience. Vanessa has amazing taste, my niece Carol offered awkwardly, trying to smooth over the tension settling across the table like heavy snow. Vanessa smiled graciously at the compliment. I just think people hold on to things for emotional reasons instead of practical ones. Then her eyes landed directly on me. No offense, Eleanor. The strange thing about humiliation is that your body notices it before your mind fully catches up. My fingers tightened around my water glass so firmly I worried it might crack. Across the table, Margaret slowly lowered her fork onto her plate. She had known me for 46 years. She could read my silences better than most people understood spoken language. Actually, Margaret said calmly, some traditions survive because they matter. Vanessa laughed softly, like a patient teacher humoring a child. Of course, but families have to evolve too. Evolve. There it was again. Every word she chose sounded harmless by itself. But together they formed something colder. A quiet campaign. Not against my decorations or recipes. Against me. Daniel finally cleared his throat. Vanessa worked really hard organizing tonight, he said carefully without looking directly at me. We thought it would make things easier for you this year. Easier. I almost smiled at that. 3 days earlier, I had spent 6 straight hours baking cinnamon rolls, roasting pecans, wrapping gifts, ironing table linens, and polishing silverware that once belonged to Robert's mother. Easier for me apparently meant doing all the work while someone else accepted the credit. The Christmas lights reflected softly against the dining room windows, casting golden patterns across familiar walls that suddenly no longer felt familiar at all. My grandson Ethan reached for another dinner roll before Vanessa stopped him gently. Sweetheart, one is enough before dessert. Her tone was sweet, but something about it unsettled me instantly. She was not just controlling the evening anymore. She was controlling the atmosphere itself. The pacing, the conversations, even the breathing space between people. And everyone was adjusting around her, without realizing it. I looked toward the kitchen doorway, where my old handwritten recipe cards still sat beside the mixer dusted lightly with flour. Robert used to stand in that kitchen every Christmas Eve, wearing ridiculous reindeer pajamas while pretending he was a professional chef. Daniel would laugh so hard milk came out of his nose at the breakfast table. Back then this house sounded different. Warm, full, safe. Now every laugh at the table felt measured first through Vanessa's approval. Then came the moment that truly opened my eyes. My granddaughter Sophie pointed innocently toward the top shelf near the fireplace. Grandma Eleanor, she asked, where is the angel Grandpa Robert always put on the tree? Silence spread instantly across the room. Vanessa smiled before I could answer. We decided to retire some outdated decorations this year, she said lightly while sipping her wine. Sometimes change is healthier for everyone. Retire. She said it so casually, as though she were speaking about an ornament. Not my marriage. Not my memories. Not the last surviving traditions of the man I buried 8 winters ago. And in that exact moment, while everyone stared down at their plates pretending not to notice what had just happened, I realized something painful. Vanessa was not trying to join this family. She was trying to rewrite it. After dinner, everyone migrated into the living room carrying plates of pie and coffee mugs while soft Christmas music floated through the house like background noise in a department store. I stayed behind in the kitchen alone for a moment, staring at the sink full of dishes I had cooked on all day, but somehow was still expected to clean myself. The smell of cinnamon, roasted turkey, and pine needles lingered in the warm air, but underneath it all sat something colder now. Something sharp. I placed both hands against the kitchen counter and closed my eyes for 3 seconds just to steady myself. Then I noticed it. My recipe box was gone. The little wooden box Robert made for me during our 25th anniversary sat beside the mixer every Christmas season for nearly 2 decades. Inside were handwritten recipe cards stained with butter, flour, and fingerprints from years of family dinners. Daniel used to joke that the entire family history was hidden inside that box. But now the space beside the mixer sat empty. My heartbeat slowed in that dangerous way it does right before anger hardens into clarity. I walked quietly toward the pantry and found the box shoved onto a lower storage shelf beside paper towels and cleaning products, like it was clutter waiting to be donated. Vanessa's voice drifted in from the living room. Honestly, I told Daniel we should probably renovate the kitchen next spring. It feels very dated. Several people murmured polite agreement. Dated. That word again. Every memory in this house apparently had an expiration date now. I carefully picked up the recipe box and ran my fingers across the tiny carved initials Robert burned into the wood himself all those years ago.
A plus serre.
I could almost hear his voice teasing me for crying over pie recipes. Ellie, he used to say, if anyone ever touches your Christmas kitchen, call the police immediately. I smiled despite myself for half a second. Then the smile faded as quickly as it came, because Robert was gone. And people become very brave once the person who protected you is no longer standing in the room. I carried the recipe box back toward the kitchen island just as Sophie wandered in holding her hot chocolate with both hands. Grandma Eleanor, she whispered quietly, why does Mommy keep changing everything? Children notice more than adults think they do. I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear gently and forced warmth into my voice. Sometimes grown-ups confuse control with helping. She frowned slightly, like she understood more than she should at 8 years old. Then Vanessa appeared in the doorway almost instantly, as though she sensed conversations happening without her supervision. There you are, she said brightly to Sophie. Come open presents with everyone. Sophie hesitated before walking back into the living room. Vanessa remained behind for a moment. Her eyes drifted toward the recipe box in my hands. Oh, she said lightly. I moved that earlier while reorganizing. The kitchen was looking a little crowded. Reorganizing. Another harmless word hiding disrespect underneath it. I nodded slowly. I noticed. She leaned casually against the doorway in that cream cashmere dress, while soft golden lights from the Christmas tree reflected behind her. You know, Eleanor, you do not have to work so hard anymore. Daniel and I can take things over from here. There it was. Not a suggestion. Not concern. A replacement announcement wrapped in fake kindness. I studied her face carefully then. The polished smile. The confident posture. The satisfaction barely hidden underneath her calm expression. She genuinely believed she was winning. Worse than that, she believed I was too old and too sentimental to stop her. And suddenly, for the very first time all evening, I understood why she had been so comfortable humiliating me publicly in my own home. Because somewhere along the way, my silence had convinced her I was powerless. Vanessa gave me one final smile before turning back toward the living room where my family laughed around my fireplace beneath my husband's missing angel ornament. Then I heard her say something softly to Daniel that made my entire body go still. By next Christmas, she whispered, this house will finally feel like ours. For a few seconds, I simply stood there holding that wooden recipe box against my chest while laughter drifted in from the living room like I was listening to another family celebrate Christmas inside my house. By next Christmas, this house will finally feel like ours. Vanessa had whispered it so casually, so confidently, not like a dream, like a plan already in motion. The strange thing was not hearing her say it. The strange thing was realizing Daniel said nothing back.
No correction. No discomfort.
No immediate defense of his mother standing 10 feet away in the kitchen that still smelled like the cinnamon bread he used to beg me to bake every Christmas morning before sunrise. Silence can betray you louder than words sometimes. I slowly returned the recipe box to the counter and looked down at my reflection in the dark kitchen window above the sink. The woman staring back at me looked composed. Calm even. But there was something different in her eyes now. Not sadness. Sadness had already come and gone months ago without me fully noticing. This was clarity. Painful, humiliating clarity. Suddenly dozens of tiny moments from the past 2 years rearranged themselves inside my memory, like puzzle pieces finally locking together. Vanessa insisting they keep spare clothes in the upstairs guest room permanently. Vanessa replacing my floral curtains with gray modern ones because they looked less grandmotherish. Vanessa convincing Daniel to install a keypad lock on the front door so everyone could come and go easier. I remembered the first time she corrected me in front of company. The first time she referred to my holiday decorations as clutter. The first time Daniel gently suggested maybe I should downsize eventually. At the time, each moment felt small enough to ignore. But disrespect rarely arrives all at once. It arrives inch by inch until one day you wake up standing outside your own life, wondering when exactly you stopped belonging inside it. Margaret appeared quietly at the kitchen entrance holding 2 coffee mugs. She handed one to me, without speaking right away. That was one thing I always loved about her. She never rushed silence. "You heard them too, did you not?" she finally asked softly. I nodded once. The ceramic mug warmed my hands while something colder settled deeper into my chest. Margaret leaned slightly closer. "Ellie," she whispered carefully, "that woman is not decorating your home. She is marking territory." Territory. The word hit me harder than it should have because deep down, I already knew she was right. Vanessa was not trying to fit into this family. She was trying to become its center of gravity. And slowly, almost invisibly, everyone had started orbiting around her instead of me. In the living room, I heard Vanessa laughing loudly while showing Sophie how to arrange presents beneath the tree properly. Even the word properly irritated me now. Every sentence from her carried hidden judgment tucked neatly beneath polished manners. Margaret studied my face for a long moment before speaking again. "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the hallway leading to Robert's old study upstairs. The door remained slightly open, just enough for me to glimpse the corner of his mahogany desk beneath the soft glow of the upstairs lamp. Suddenly, I remembered something Robert told me 3 years before he died while organizing paperwork late one winter night. "Ellie," he had said while adjusting his reading glasses, "people behave very differently when they think kindness means weakness." At the time I laughed because Robert always prepared for storms before clouds even appeared. But standing there in my own kitchen while someone else slowly rehearsed becoming queen of my family, his words no longer sounded paranoid. They sounded prophetic. Then Vanessa walked into the kitchen carrying empty dessert plates with that same polished smile still painted across her face. "Eleanor," she said sweetly, "next year maybe we should simplify Christmas dinner. At your age, all this work cannot be easy anymore." At your age. Such a small sentence. For words wrapped neatly like a gift. But underneath sat the real message she wanted everyone to hear. You are fading. You are outdated. You are being replaced. I smiled politely back at her then. And for the first time all evening I stopped feeling hurt. Because the moment someone finally reveals exactly who they are, pain becomes information. And information can be very useful. The rest of the evening unfolded like a performance where everyone already knew their roles except me. Vanessa moved gracefully through my living room refilling wine glasses, directing conversations, even deciding which presents should be opened first. Every time someone looked uncertain, their eyes drifted toward her automatically now instead of toward me. That was the part that hurt most. Not her confidence. Not even her disrespect. It was how quickly people adapt when power shifts inside a family. I sat quietly near the fireplace, holding a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold, while the Christmas tree lights flickered softly across familiar faces. Sophie climbed onto the rug to unwrap gifts, while Ethan argued excitedly over batteries for a toy drone. The children still sounded like Christmas. Innocent.
Warm.
Untouched by the strange tension tightening beneath the surface of the adults around them. Vanessa knelt beside the tree adjusting gift ribbons for photographs nobody asked her to take. "Perfect," she whispered while angling her phone. "I want this Christmas to feel elegant." Elegant. Another one of her favorite words. As though love only counted if it looked expensive enough online. Daniel stood nearby holding a glass of bourbon while watching her with exhausted admiration. He looked less like a husband and more like a man constantly trying to avoid disappointing someone. And suddenly I remembered something I had ignored for far too long. Daniel used to call me every Sunday morning after church, without fail. Then Vanessa came into his life, and the calls slowly became texts. Then short texts. Then silence unless they needed something. Help with the down payment. Babysitting. Temporary storage in the garage. Advice about refinancing. The requests never stopped, but the connection did. Looking back now, I realized Vanessa had not pulled Daniel away from me all at once. She had done it gently, strategically over years, like ivy growing over brick until eventually the wall underneath disappears. Mom. Daniel's voice startled me from my thoughts. He stood near the fireplace, now rubbing the back of his neck nervously the way he used to do before admitting mistakes as a teenager. Can we talk for a second? Vanessa remained near the tree pretending not to listen, which of course meant she was listening to every word. I followed Daniel toward the hallway near the staircase, where the noise from the living room softened slightly. For a moment he looked like my little boy again. The same blue eyes. The same nervous posture. But children grow up. And sometimes they grow away from you too. Vanessa means well, he said quietly before I even spoke. Of course he started there. Defending her first. She just wants to help modernize things a little. I stared at him carefully. Modernize Christmas?
He sighed softly.
Mom, that is not what I mean. But it was exactly what he meant. Not just Christmas. The house. The routines. The authority.
Me.
Daniel, I asked calmly, did you know she moved your father's angel ornament off the tree? His face tightened briefly before he glanced away. That tiny reaction told me everything. He knew. Vanessa thought the star looked cleaner, he answered carefully. Cleaner. I almost laughed. It amazed me how easily people replace sentiment with aesthetics once they stop valuing the people attached to the memories. And did Vanessa also decide my recipe box belonged next to cleaning supplies? I asked. He exhaled slowly now, frustration slipping into his expression. Mom, why are you making such a big deal out of small things? Small things. There it was again. The universal phrase people use when they benefit from minimizing your pain. I looked past him toward the living room where Vanessa laughed brightly while arranging my family around my Christmas tree like pieces in a catalog photo shoot. Then Daniel lowered his voice slightly. Honestly, Mom, maybe you should let her help more. You do not have to control everything anymore. For one brief second, the entire hallway felt perfectly silent. Even the music seemed to disappear. Because that sentence finally exposed the truth underneath all the polite smiles and holiday performances. They did not see me as the foundation of this family anymore. They saw me as an obstacle standing in the way of the version they wanted to build. And the most dangerous part was not Vanessa believing that. It was my son starting to believe it too. Daniel's words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. You do not have to control everything anymore. I returned slowly to the living room carrying my empty coffee mug like it weighed 50 pounds instead of a few ounces. The Christmas lights blurred softly against the corners of my vision while laughter rose and fell around me in waves that no longer felt connected to me at all. Vanessa sat comfortably on the floor beside the tree now, helping Sophie untangle ribbon while my family gathered around her naturally, effortlessly, as though she had always belonged at the center of every holiday memory. I stood near the hallway entrance for a moment unnoticed. That alone told me how much had already changed. Years ago, the room shifted when I entered it. Not because I demanded attention, but because mothers become emotional anchors in families without anyone realizing it. We remember allergies, birthdays, favorite pies, hidden griefs, unspoken tensions. We hold traditions together quietly while everyone else simply arrives and enjoys them. But once people stop seeing your effort, they start assuming the magic happens by itself. Vanessa looked up and smiled brightly when she noticed me watching. Eleanor, she called sweetly, come sit down and relax for once. Relax. Such a generous invitation inside my own home. Margaret glanced toward me immediately, reading the insult underneath the sugar-coated tone. But everyone else remained distracted by wrapping paper and holiday music. Daniel handed Vanessa another glass of wine before sitting beside her on the rug. He looked peaceful there, comfortable, like a man relieved someone else had finally taken over emotional labor he never appreciated when it came from his mother. Sophie held up a framed family photo she had just unwrapped from one of Vanessa's gifts. "Look," she exclaimed happily. "It is all of us." Vanessa beamed proudly. "I had it updated last month." My stomach tightened slightly as Sophie carried the frame toward me. The photograph showed the entire family standing in front of this very house beneath autumn leaves and golden sunlight. Daniel smiled. The children smiled. Vanessa stood perfectly centered beside him, wearing cream-colored boots and one of those expensive wool coats influencers wear online while pretending they just happen to look flawless picking apples.
And me.
I stood at the far edge of the photograph, partially cropped by the frame itself. Almost accidental. Almost removable. I stared at that image for several seconds too long. Because photographs tell the truth people try hiding with words. Vanessa had not simply updated the picture. She had updated the hierarchy. "Beautiful, right?" Vanessa asked while adjusting her bracelet casually. "I wanted something that really reflected our family now."
Our family now.
Again, she said these things openly because she no longer feared consequences. Why would she? Every small disrespect had gone unanswered. Every boundary crossed had been absorbed politely by me and ignored by Daniel. People eventually treat your silence as permission. Ethan suddenly looked toward the staircase. "Grandma," he asked innocently, "why is Grandpa Robert's study locked?" My pulse slowed instantly. Vanessa answered before I could. "Some rooms are probably better left untouched, sweetheart."
Probably.
Better. Untouched. Every sentence from her sounded carefully constructed to appear reasonable while quietly removing me from ownership piece by piece. I looked toward the upstairs hallway, where the study door remained closed beneath warm amber lighting. Robert's study had become sacred after his death. Not dramatic sacred. Quiet sacred. His reading chair still sat near the bookshelf exactly where he left it. His fountain pens remained lined perfectly inside the desk drawer. Sometimes grief survives through objects, because objects stay when people cannot. Vanessa followed my gaze upstairs and smiled faintly. "Honestly," she added casually while sipping wine, "Daniel and I were thinking that room might make a perfect nursery someday, if we ever have another baby." Something shifted inside me then. Not explosive anger. Not heartbreak. Worse. Precision. Cold, focused precision. Because suddenly I understood the full picture clearly for the first time all evening. This was never about Christmas decorations or modern traditions. Vanessa was slowly rehearsing a future where my memories, my routines, my marriage, and eventually even my presence itself could be minimized into inconvenience. And the most dangerous part was that she believed I would simply smile politely while she did it. The evening should have ended there. Most Christmas gatherings do. Dessert plates stacked near the sink, children growing sleepy on couches, relatives putting coats back on while promising to meet again next year. But something about that night refused to settle peacefully. It felt like standing inside a house moments before a storm finally breaks open the sky. Around 10:30, guests slowly began gathering their things. Carol kissed my cheek awkwardly before leaving. My nephew shook my hand instead of hugging me for some reason that made the distance feel even larger. One by one, headlights disappeared down the snow-covered street outside my living room windows while soft jazz Christmas music still drifted through the speakers Vanessa had connected earlier because my old playlist was too melancholy. By the time the front door closed behind the last guest, only 5 people remained in the house.
Me.
Daniel. Vanessa.
Sophie. Ethan.
The children had fallen asleep upstairs in the guest room beneath quilts my mother stitched by hand nearly 60 years ago. Vanessa insisted they stay overnight because the roads looked icy. Daniel agreed immediately, without asking me first. Another tiny decision made inside my home as though my approval had become optional. I stood near the dining room collecting empty glasses while Vanessa walked around blowing out candles one by one like she already owned the silence too. "Tonight went beautifully," she announced happily while carrying wrapping paper toward the trash bin. Honestly, this was probably our best Christmas yet.
Our.
Again that word. Daniel nodded absently while checking his phone. "Yeah," he murmured. "It felt different this year." Different. Such a harmless little word for something that felt like emotional eviction. I carried a stack of dessert plates into the kitchen slowly, listening to them continue talking in the next room. People seemed more relaxed without all the old formal traditions, Vanessa continued. Your mom takes things so personally sometimes. I stopped walking. Daniel sighed quietly. She just misses Dad. Daniel, Vanessa answered gently. Your mother has been a widow for 8 years. At some point, she has to let the house evolve. Let the house evolve. Not our lives. Not the family dynamic. The house itself. As if the walls belonged more to future plans than to the people who built them. I stared down at the plates in my hands while something inside me became frighteningly calm. The kind of calm that arrives after pain finally burns through denial completely. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Margaret had remained quietly in the den most of the evening, reading beside the fireplace, while everyone else socialized. I had almost forgotten she stayed behind to avoid driving late through snow. She looked toward the living room where Vanessa's laughter echoed lightly again. She is already speaking about you in the past tense, Margaret said softly. Her words settled heavily between us because they were true. Vanessa did not see herself joining my life. She saw herself replacing it. I carefully placed the dishes beside the sink and looked toward the hallway leading upstairs. Do you know what frightens me most? I whispered. Margaret shook her head slowly. It is not even Vanessa anymore. I paused. It is how easy it became for Daniel to let her erase me. Saying the words aloud hurt differently. Sharper. More honest. Mothers spend years believing love creates permanent loyalty. But adulthood teaches painful lessons about convenience, influence, and emotional weakness. Daniel loved me. I knew he did. But love without courage becomes fragile when someone stronger controls the atmosphere around you. Vanessa suddenly entered the kitchen carrying a small cardboard box filled with leftover decorations. Oh, good, she said brightly. I started organizing things for storage. She placed the box onto the counter casually. I looked inside, and my breath caught instantly. Robert's angel ornament rested at the bottom beneath tangled ribbon. And unused candles. Not wrapped carefully. Not protected. Tossed aside like disposable clutter. I figured we could keep some of these older decorations downstairs from now on, Vanessa explained while adjusting her bracelet. The newer aesthetic photographs better upstairs. I reached slowly into the box and lifted the angel ornament carefully into my hands. Tiny silver wings. Faded gold trim. One crack near the base from the year Daniel dropped it at age 9 and cried for an hour because he thought he ruined Christmas forever. Robert glued it back together himself that same night at the kitchen table while telling Daniel that important things survive damage all the time. I stared at the ornament silently for several seconds before finally looking back at Vanessa. And for the first time all evening, she seemed slightly uncomfortable under my gaze. Vanessa's smile faltered for only a second when she noticed the way I held the angel ornament in my hands. Most people would not have seen it. But once you spend decades reading children's faces across library tables and comforting grieving parents in quiet school hallways, you learn to notice the tiny fractures people try hiding behind polished expressions. I was only trying to help organize things, she said lightly while crossing her arms. Her voice remained sweet, but there was defensiveness underneath it now.
Good.
For the first time all evening, she no longer sounded completely certain of herself. I ran my thumb gently along the cracked edge of the ornament without taking my eyes off her. Do you know why this ornament matters? I asked calmly. Vanessa hesitated briefly before forcing a small laugh. Because it is sentimental? Sentimental. Such a dismissive little word people use when they have never sacrificed anything large enough to attach meaning to objects. Robert bought this during our first Christmas after Daniel was born, I answered quietly. We could barely afford groceries that winter. We used newspaper as wrapping paper because money was so tight. The kitchen fell silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and distant Christmas music drifting from the living room speakers. Vanessa shifted slightly against the counter. Uncomfortable now that the conversation carried emotional weight she could not organize away with labels like clutter or outdated. Daniel dropped it when he was 9. I continued softly, while studying the tiny crack near the base. He cried harder over this ornament than he cried breaking his arm falling off his bicycle that summer. A faint smile almost touched my lips at the memory. Robert stayed awake until 2 in the morning repairing it because he said family traditions survive when people choose to protect them. Vanessa looked toward the hallway awkwardly, like she suddenly wanted the conversation to end. "That is sweet," she murmured politely.
Sweet.
Another small word shrinking entire lifetimes into decorative nostalgia. I carefully placed the ornament on the counter beside me instead of returning it to the storage box. Then I looked directly at her again. "Do you know what the problem is, Vanessa?" She blinked once, clearly surprised by the question. "I do not think you understand the difference between updating a home and replacing the people who built it." The silence after that sentence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Somewhere upstairs, one of the children shifted in bed. Snow tapped softly against the kitchen windows. Vanessa's posture stiffened slightly now, her polished confidence developing tiny cracks around the edges. "I think you are misunderstanding me," she replied carefully. "Daniel, and I just want to make things feel more current for the kids." For the kids. Every controlling person eventually hides behind children because nobody wants to sound unreasonable arguing against family happiness. But by then I was finally seeing the patterns clearly. The language, the strategy, the gradual emotional displacement disguised as practicality. Before I could answer, Daniel entered the kitchen carrying 2 empty glasses. The moment he sensed tension, his shoulders tightened automatically. He looked tired suddenly. Not physically tired, emotionally tired, like a man trapped between the woman who raised him and the woman now shaping his future. "Everything okay in here?" he asked carefully. Vanessa immediately softened her expression and smiled at him. "Of course," she answered smoothly before I could speak. "Your mother was just telling me the story behind the angel ornament." "Your mother, not Eleanor anymore." "Interesting." People change language when they feel unstable. Daniel glanced toward the ornament on the counter and sighed quietly. "Mom always gets emotional around Christmas decorations." Always. Emotional. Another reduction. Another way of making grief and memory sound inconvenient instead of human. I studied my son carefully then. Really studied him. The faint lines near his eyes that had deepened over the years. The nervous habit of rubbing his wedding ring when conflict entered a room. The exhaustion hidden beneath politeness. Suddenly, I realized something painful. Daniel did not look like a cruel man. He looked like a weak one. And weakness inside families can wound people just as deeply as cruelty. Vanessa moved closer to him naturally, her hand resting lightly against his arm in a gesture so practiced it almost looked subconscious. "I think Eleanor is just having trouble with change," she said gently. Trouble with change. There it was. The narrative. Not disrespect. Not replacement. Not emotional erasure. Just an older woman struggling to adapt. And in that exact moment, while standing barefoot in my own kitchen holding the last ornament my husband ever repaired with his own hands, I realized Vanessa had already spent months quietly building a version of me inside Daniel's mind. A fragile version. An aging version. A woman whose feelings could eventually be dismissed as confusion instead of truth. That night, after everyone finally went upstairs, I remained alone in the living room with only the glow of the Christmas tree lighting the darkness around me. The house sounded different after midnight. Older.
Softer.
The heating vents hummed quietly through the walls while snow drifted past the windows in slow white waves beneath the porch light outside. I sat in Robert's leather armchair holding the angel ornament carefully in both hands like something alive and fragile. Upstairs, I could hear faint footsteps moving across the floorboards now and then. Vanessa and Daniel settling into the guest room. The same guest room that used to belong to Daniel before he grew up and slowly became a stranger wearing my son's face. I leaned my head back against the chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Exhaustion settled deep into my bones, but sleep felt impossible. My mind kept replaying every sentence from the evening. Every smile. Every small humiliation carefully disguised as concern. At your age. Easier for you. More modern. Let the house evolve. The words blended together until they formed something much uglier underneath. You're no longer necessary here. I opened my eyes slowly and looked toward the staircase. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. 3 months earlier, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly one afternoon while Vanessa stayed in the car taking a business call. We sat at this exact dining table drinking coffee while autumn rain tapped gently against the windows. He seemed distracted that day, nervous almost. "Mom," he asked casually while stirring cream into his coffee, "have you ever thought about simplifying things legally? You know, estate planning and all that?" At the time I answered, without suspicion, "Your father and I handled all of that years ago." Daniel nodded too quickly then.
Right.
Of course. I remembered how disappointed Vanessa looked when he returned to the car afterward. At the time I thought nothing of it. Now the memories sat differently in my chest. Sharper. Connected. I looked across the room toward the hallway leading to Robert's study upstairs. Suddenly, I no longer felt tired. I felt alert, focused, quietly awake in a way I had not felt for years. Slowly, I stood from the chair and walked upstairs without turning on additional lights. The hallway remained dim except for the soft amber lamp glowing near the study door. I opened the room carefully and stepped inside. Robert's scent had faded years ago, but somehow the room still carried his presence.
Orderly. Calm.
Thoughtful. Books lined the shelves exactly as he left them. Legal folders remained organized alphabetically inside the cabinet beneath the window. Robert believed preparation was a form of love. People behave differently once money, houses, and inheritance enter the conversation, he used to tell me. Even good people can become unrecognizable. At the time, I thought he was overly cautious. But Robert grew up poor. He trusted character, not appearances. I sat behind his desk slowly and opened the bottom drawer, where our family documents remained stored inside neatly labeled folders. House deed, insurance policies, trust agreements, property taxes. Every document sat exactly where Robert placed them before cancer took him away 8 years ago. My fingers paused briefly on one folder in particular. Whitmore Family Estate Structure. I stared at the label for several seconds before opening it carefully. Inside rested the legal protections Robert insisted we create after his diagnosis. Not because I distrust Daniel, he told me back then while adjusting his reading glasses, but because grief changes families. Marriage changes families too. I unfolded the top document slowly, while the grandfather clock downstairs chimed midnight through the silent house. And then I saw it. The clause. The one Robert insisted on adding personally after a long private conversation with our attorney nearly a year before he died. I read every line carefully, while something cold and steady settled through me like winter ice strengthening over dark water. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked faintly from the guest room down the hall. Vanessa and Daniel slept peacefully, believing they understood this house, this family, and me completely. But sitting there alone beneath the warm lamp in Robert's study while legal papers rested quietly beneath my hands, I finally realized something important. They had mistaken my silence for surrender. And that was about to become a very expensive misunderstanding. I stayed in Robert's study until nearly 2 in the morning, reading every page twice. Outside, snow continued falling steadily across the neighborhood, covering driveways, rooftops, and silent streets in fresh white layers while the entire house slept peacefully around me. But I no longer felt peaceful. I felt awake in a way grief had not allowed me to feel for years. The folder remained open beneath the desk lamp while Robert's handwriting filled the margins of several documents in neat blue ink. Notes, reminders, warnings. Robert documented everything carefully during the final year of his illness because he understood something I did not back then. Love inside families does not erase human weakness. Sometimes it simply delays it. I leaned back slowly in his leather chair while staring at one specific paragraph near the bottom of the trust agreement. The Whitmore residence could not be transferred, sold, refinanced, remodeled structurally, or inherited by Daniel unless several conditions were met jointly over a continuous 5-year period following Robert's death. Financial stability, independent housing history, respectful conduct toward surviving spouse. No coercion involving residency or property control. Robert wrote the wording himself with our attorney after watching too many inheritance battles destroy families during his years practicing corporate law. At the time, I thought he was being excessive. Daniel adored us back then. Vanessa was not even in the picture yet. But Robert always prepared for storms before anyone else noticed clouds. My eyes drifted toward a second document clipped beneath the trust papers. A handwritten letter addressed only to me. Ellie, if you are reading this, it means something inside the family no longer feels right. My throat tightened instantly. Even after 8 years, seeing his handwriting still felt like hearing his voice unexpectedly in another room. I continued reading slowly beneath the warm yellow light. You have a good heart, but sometimes good hearts tolerate disrespect because they mistake endurance for love. Protecting people from consequences does not always protect the family. Sometimes it weakens it. I closed my eyes briefly. Every sentence felt painfully current. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed softly again. 2 o'clock. I imagined Vanessa asleep upstairs already planning next Christmas colors, furniture changes, future renovations, and eventually perhaps even conversations about assisted living or downsizing. Not because she necessarily hated me. That would almost hurt less.
No.
Vanessa simply believed she was more qualified to lead this family now. More modern, more efficient, more relevant. And slowly, Daniel had started agreeing with her version of reality because it was easier than confronting what she was becoming. I looked back down at the final pages of the trust documents carefully. The clause Robert created was stronger than I remembered. Far stronger. If Daniel or his spouse attempted to pressure me regarding residency, ownership, or household authority, their future inheritance rights could be suspended indefinitely at the discretion of the surviving trustee.
Me.
I sat perfectly still for several seconds, absorbing the weight of that realization. Vanessa believed she was slowly taking control of this house. But legally, she had no control at all. Worse than that, every manipulative step she took was placing Daniel's future at risk, without even realizing it. For the first time all evening, I almost smiled. Not out of revenge. Out of clarity. There is something strangely calming about finally understanding where you truly stand after months or years of emotional confusion. I carefully returned every document to its folder exactly as I found it before locking the drawer again. Then I carried Robert's angel ornament downstairs and placed it gently back onto the Christmas tree myself. The tiny silver wings caught the soft lights beautifully once restored to their proper place at the top branch. I stood there alone in the dark living room staring at it for a long moment. Then I heard footsteps descending slowly from upstairs behind me. Vanessa appeared near the staircase wrapped in one of my spare guest robes holding a glass of water. She froze slightly when she noticed the ornament back on the tree. "Oh," she said softly. "You put it back." I turned toward her calmly. "Yes." Silence stretched between us while snow continued falling outside. Then Vanessa gave a small, uneasy laugh. "I hope you are not upset about tonight." Upset. Such a small word for emotional displacement inside your own home. I studied her face carefully beneath the Christmas lights. The polished confidence had returned somewhat, but uncertainty lingered now. Beneath the surface. Good. Finally.
No, Vanessa, I answered quietly.
Tonight clarified many things for me. Something about my tone made her expression flicker briefly with discomfort again. And standing there beside my restored Christmas tree while Robert's legal protections rested safely upstairs inside his study, I realized something important. Vanessa still believed this was a social game. She had no idea it had already become a legal one. The next morning, the house smelled like coffee, cinnamon, and tension hidden beneath politeness. I woke before sunrise the way I always do during Christmas week and stood quietly in the kitchen wearing Robert's old navy cardigan while snow continued drifting softly outside the windows. For years, early mornings were my favorite part of the holidays. The world felt honest before everyone woke up and started performing for each other. But that morning, honesty carried a different shape. I no longer felt confused about what was happening inside my own family. Painful clarity had replaced denial completely. I poured coffee into my favorite ceramic mug, the pale blue one Daniel painted for me in second grade, with crooked little snowflakes around the rim. World's Best Mom was written across the front in shaky childhood handwriting. I stared at it for a moment longer than usual before taking a slow sip. Upstairs, I heard movement begin. Doors opening. Plumbing running. Vanessa's soft footsteps crossing the hallway above me. Then came her voice floating lightly downstairs. Daniel, do not forget to ask your mom about the contractor recommendation before we leave. Contractor. Interesting. A few minutes later, Vanessa entered the kitchen dressed perfectly despite the early hour. Cream sweater. Gold earrings. Hair brushed smooth like she expected photographs at breakfast. She smiled politely when she saw me standing near the stove. Good morning, Eleanor, she said brightly. You are up early. It is my house, I answered calmly. I tend to wake up with it. Something flickered behind her eyes at that response.
Small. Fast.
But noticeable. Good. She walked toward the coffee maker confidently, opening cabinets without asking though she had already memorized ownership into her routine. I was talking to Daniel upstairs. She began casually while reaching for mugs. And we really think this place could be incredible with a few updates. This place. Not your home. Not your family house. This place. I remained silent, letting her continue. Controlling people often reveal themselves fully when nobody interrupts them. The kitchen especially has so much potential, she said while glancing around critically. Open shelving would brighten everything. And honestly, removing that wall between the dining room and living room could modernize the entire flow. Remove that wall. My eyes drifted automatically toward the archway beside the dining room. Robert built that wall himself during the summer Daniel turned 12. He spent 3 weekends covered in sawdust because I once mentioned wanting separate spaces for holiday dinners and family gatherings. I still remembered him standing proudly in the unfinished doorway holding a hammer while Daniel handed him nails one by one like a tiny assistant. Vanessa kept speaking, unaware memories were sitting quietly behind every object she casually planned to erase. I found an interior designer online last month who specializes in transitional family homes, she continued. Last month. My stomach tightened slightly. Not future ideas. Existing plans. You have been planning renovations already? I asked quietly. She laughed lightly, like the question surprised her. Nothing official yet. Just inspiration. Inspiration. Another harmless word hiding entitlement underneath it. Daniel finally entered the kitchen rubbing sleep from his eyes, while reaching automatically for coffee. He kissed Vanessa on the cheek before even acknowledging me. Tiny moments reveal priorities better than speeches do. Morning, Mom, he mumbled distractedly. Vanessa smiled at him immediately. I was just telling your mother about some design ideas. Daniel nodded too quickly. Oh yeah, the ones you showed me. Showed him. Discussed together. Planned privately. Inside my house. I watched them carefully while understanding settled deeper into my chest. They no longer viewed me as decision-maker here. In their minds, I was simply the aging current resident standing temporarily between them and the life they imagined building. Vanessa suddenly opened the refrigerator and frowned slightly. Honestly, she said while examining leftovers, you keep far too much food in here for one person. One person. Not widow. Not mother. Not homeowner. Just one person taking up excessive space. I set my coffee mug down carefully onto the counter then. The sound echoed sharper than expected through the quiet kitchen. Both of them looked toward me immediately. And for the first time since Christmas dinner began the night before, I saw something unfamiliar cross Daniel's face when he met my eyes. Uncertainty. Because suddenly he realized I was no longer shrinking myself to keep everyone comfortable. And uncertainty is dangerous for people who have grown too comfortable crossing lines without consequences. The kitchen stayed quiet for several long seconds after I set down my coffee mug. Vanessa looked away first. That told me more than anything she had said all weekend. Confident people hold eye contact easily when they believe they still control the room. I did not mean anything by that, she said lightly while closing the refrigerator door.
Of course she did.
Every sentence she spoke carried intention carefully hidden beneath polished manners. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her now, sensing tension thickening through the air like pressure before thunder. "Mom," he said cautiously, "Vanessa is just trying to help." Help.
I almost pitied him then.
Weak people often confuse control with competence because it relieves them from responsibility. I folded my hands calmly against the kitchen counter and looked directly at my son. "Daniel," I asked quietly, "when exactly did helping begin to include redesigning my home without speaking to me first?" His mouth opened slightly before closing again. Vanessa answered for him immediately. "Nobody is redesigning anything yet."
Yet.
There was the truth hiding accidentally inside her sentence. "Not if."
Yet.
I nodded slowly as though considering her words carefully. "Interesting." Vanessa crossed her arms defensively.
Now.
"I think you are taking this much more personally than necessary." Personally. As though decades of marriage, memories, sacrifice, and grief should somehow remain emotionally detached for her convenience. I turned toward the kitchen window, where snow still covered the backyard Robert spent years landscaping himself. The bird feeder near the fence remained tilted slightly to one side because he always refused to replace it after Daniel built it poorly in middle school. "Imperfections make a home feel lived in," Robert used to say. Vanessa would probably call it outdated too. "Do you know what is fascinating?" I asked softly, without looking back at them. "People only accuse you of being emotional after they benefit from disrespecting your feelings." Silence answered me this time.
Good.
Let them sit inside it for once. Upstairs, Sophie's footsteps padded faintly across the hallway before disappearing again. The children remained innocent inside all this. That mattered to me more than anything. I never wanted them to carry memories of bitterness attached to Christmas mornings, which was exactly why I suddenly understood something important. Vanessa counted on my dignity. She relied on it. She assumed I would continue absorbing humiliation quietly because maintaining family harmony mattered more to me than confrontation. And until now, she had been correct. Daniel rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Can we please not do this today?" There it was again. Not denial. Avoidance. He still refused to confront what was happening directly because confrontation would force him to choose between comfort and character. Vanessa stepped closer to him immediately, resting one hand against his arm in that calm, reassuring way she always used whenever tension appeared. "We should probably get the kids ready soon anyway," she said gently while glancing toward me carefully. "The roads might get worse later." I watched her closely then. Really closely. And suddenly I saw it with perfect clarity. Vanessa did not fear hurting my feelings. She feared losing influence. Every calculated smile, every subtle insult, every attempt to redefine traditions or authority inside this house came from the same place. Control disguised as modernization. Daniel looked toward me again, clearly hoping I would smooth everything over the way mothers often do after family conflict. But something inside me had shifted permanently during the night upstairs in Robert's study. I was no longer interested in protecting adults from consequences they knowingly created. "Before you leave," I said calmly, "there is something both of you should probably understand." The room immediately became still again. Vanessa's posture straightened almost imperceptibly. Daniel frowned slightly. I reached for my coffee mug slowly and took one final sip before continuing. "This house is not simply a family home filled with sentimental decorations." I paused deliberately. "It is also a legally protected estate." Daniel blinked once. Vanessa's expression tightened despite her effort to hide it.
Good.
Finally. A real reaction. "What does that mean?" Daniel asked carefully. I met his eyes fully for the first time that morning. "It means your father anticipated certain possibilities long before either of you did." The silence afterward felt heavier than any argument could have. Vanessa no longer looked confident now. She looked alert, calculating. Nervous people become very quiet once they realize someone else may understand the game better than they do. And standing there in my kitchen while fresh snow covered the world outside and Robert's restored angel ornament glimmered quietly in the next room, I realized the balance inside this family had finally begun to change. Neither of them spoke for several seconds after I mentioned the estate protections. The silence felt different now. No longer awkward holiday tension. Strategic silence. The kind people fall into when they suddenly realize there are consequences hiding underneath assumptions. Vanessa recovered first, of course. Women like her always do. She straightened her sweater calmly and offered a polite little smile that would have looked convincing to anyone who had not spent the last 24 hours watching her slowly attempt to erase another woman's place inside her own family. I am sure Robert only wanted to make certain everything stayed secure for the children, she said carefully. There it was again. The children. Her favorite shield whenever conversations drifted too close to truth. I nodded once. Robert believed family homes should remain places of respect. I let the sentence settle naturally before adding, especially toward the person still living in them. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her now. For the first time all weekend, he looked genuinely unsettled instead of merely exhausted.
Good.
Discomfort is often the first stage of awareness. Vanessa folded her arms lightly. Nobody has disrespected you, Eleanor. The confidence in her voice sounded thinner now. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because deep down, I suspected Vanessa genuinely believed control and competence were the same thing. She thought organizing rooms, replacing traditions, and directing people automatically made her the strongest person in the house. But true authority does not arrive through performance. It reveals itself quietly when pressure enters the room. And pressure had finally arrived. I walked slowly toward the dining room archway where morning light spilled softly across the table, still carrying faint marks from Christmas dinner the night before. Wine rings.
Crumbs.
Folded napkins. Evidence of a family gathering that somehow managed to feel lonelier than any Christmas since Robert died. My fingers brushed lightly against the wooden chair at the head of the table. Robert's chair. The one Vanessa sat in without hesitation. Do you know something interesting? I asked quietly without turning around. Your father never once sat at the head of this table while my mother was alive. Daniel frowned slightly behind me. What do you mean?
I looked back at him then.
I mean, he understood something people seem to forget now. I paused. Homes are not claimed through confidence. They are earned through sacrifice. Silence again. Vanessa's expression hardened almost invisibly around the edges. There it was. The real her surfacing beneath polished manners. Not rage. Entitlement. She believed effort from the past mattered less than usefulness in the present. Robert's letter upstairs suddenly echoed inside my mind again. Protecting people from consequences does not always protect the family. Sometimes it weakens it. I took a slow breath before continuing calmly. Your father worked 2 jobs for 11 years to keep this house after the recession. I returned to full-time work 6 weeks after surgery because we nearly lost it once when Daniel was little. My eyes met my son's. Every Christmas in this room exists because somebody sacrificed for it long before it became aesthetically pleasing enough for social media photographs. Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. Good. Let him remember. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but I raised one hand gently. Not aggressively.
Calmly.
And somehow that seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. You both should understand something very clearly, I said softly. I spent too long mistaking silence for kindness. That will not happen anymore. The words landed heavily inside the kitchen. Even the refrigerator hum suddenly sounded louder afterward. Upstairs, Sophie laughed faintly at something Ethan said, completely unaware that the emotional foundation beneath this family had shifted permanently over breakfast. Vanessa looked toward Daniel instinctively now, searching for reassurance. But he remained quiet. Because finally, for the first time in years perhaps, he was being forced to stand in the uncomfortable space between the woman who raised him and the woman who tried replacing her. I picked up my blue coffee mug again and walked slowly toward the living room where Robert's angel ornament still glimmered at the top of the Christmas tree exactly where it belonged. The silver wings reflected morning sunlight beautifully across the room. Behind me, neither Daniel nor Vanessa followed immediately. Good. Let them sit with uncertainty for once. Because uncertainty has a way of exposing people more honestly than confrontation ever could. And standing there beside the tree, while snow melted slowly outside and the house settled quietly around me once again, I realized something important. Christmas had not revealed who I was. I already knew that. It had revealed who everyone else was willing to become when they thought the woman protecting the family had finally grown too tired to protect herself.